today, another terrible tragedy. As they left, 1,200 workers at the Ingersoll CAMI plant learned that they would lose their jobs after that Prime Minister promised he would negotiate a win and that he would keep their jobs here in Canada.
I'll tell you how the Prime Minister how he will deal with the auto sector. He will look at the auto workers in the eyes and he will say, "We will fight for your job."
Across Ontario, the sound of silence has replaced the rhythm of machines. At General Motors' CAMI plant in Ingersoll, more than 1,200 workers learned their electric van line would shut down, just days after Stellantis moved its Jeep Compass production from Brampton to Illinois. Together, those decisions erased over 4,000 Canadian jobs in less than 2 weeks. What had long been the heartbeat of Canada's industrial identity now feels like a symbol of loss and uncertainty. That shock quickly spilled into Parliament. The chamber turned into a political crossfire as opposition leader Pierre Poilievre accused the government of betraying workers and wasting billions in subsidies that failed to protect Canadian jobs. His words echoed the frustration felt in auto towns across the province. But Industry Minister Mélanie Joly rose to answer, calm yet defiant, promising that Ottawa was already meeting with GM's leadership, Unifor representatives, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford to form a national response group. Her vow was simple: Canada will fight for these jobs. That exchange captured more than politics. It was a snapshot of a country wrestling with its industrial pride, the belief that Canadian workers could compete and thrive in a continental system that once felt unbreakable. Yet now, with assembly lines going dark, Canadians are asking a painful question. Who still controls the future of North America's auto industry, and how much of it still belongs to Canada?
We're negotiating back in Washington, but also, this is important to say that I met this morning with the Canadian CEO of GM. I was in conversation with the head of the labor union of Unifor, and I also talked to Doug Ford, and I talked to Vic Fideli. And you know what? We're putting in place a response group. We will make sure that we fight for these jobs.
The parliamentary clash centered squarely on General Motors and the shock at Ingersoll. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre pressed the government on why more than 1,200 GM workers were being left without a line to build, accusing Ottawa of failing to shield families whose paychecks depended on the CAMI plant. He framed the moment as proof that the government's support for the auto sector had not translated into concrete protection for Ingersoll. Industry Minister Mélanie Joly kept the focus on GM. She outlined back-to-back calls with the company's Canadian leadership, coordination with Unifor, and direct talks with Ontario's Premier and economic ministers. The immediate objective, she said, was practical and urgent: secure a replacement model for CAMI so that Ingersoll keeps its skilled workforce employed rather than losing it to attrition. Only after anchoring the debate in GM did the conversation widen. Stellantis surfaced as context, a reminder that the Brampton hit had come just days earlier and deepened the sense of vulnerability across Ontario's auto belt. Poilievre pointed to the multi-billion-dollar support for Stellantis as evidence that generous deals did not guarantee Canadian jobs. Joly countered by stressing enforcement and accountability while steering the chamber back to the task at hand, stabilizing GM's footprint and preventing further job erosion at CAMI. By the end of the exchange, the lines were clear. The opposition demanded answers for the immediate loss at GM. The government presented a plan centered on Ingersoll: engage the company, mobilize the province, work with labor, and land a new model. For workers, the message mattered less than the outcome. What they needed was not another headline, but a path that keeps the lights on inside CAMI and preserves the skills that built Ontario's reputation in the first place.
At first glance, Trump's auto push looked like a victory for his America First promise. Automakers announced investments worth billions across Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana. Stellantis alone committed $13 billion and 5,000 new American jobs. The headlines were exactly what the White House wanted: factories returning home, a rebirth of U.S. manufacturing power. But behind those headlines, a different story was unfolding. North America's auto network had been built over decades of cross-border integration. Engines made in Ontario traveled to Michigan for assembly, then returned to Canada for final finishing. When that system was broken, efficiency crumbled. Suppliers faced shipping delays and shortages of critical parts. Labor costs in U.S. plants surged as companies scrambled to fill gaps left by disrupted Canadian production. Analysts from Reuters and Bloomberg note that what looked like a manufacturing revival has instead become a patchwork of inefficiencies. Investment has not translated into productivity. Relocation costs and logistics bottlenecks have erased much of the benefit of reshoring. Even American plants now depend on Canadian suppliers that are scaling back, leaving the entire ecosystem strained. In Canada, the shock runs deep. Entire communities in Brampton, Ingersoll, and Oshawa feel the impact, not only in lost paychecks, but in the erosion of confidence that Canada can still build its own future. Economists say the region is not experiencing a renaissance of industry, but a redistribution of risk. Trump may have won a headline, but he lost an ecosystem.
Our goal is to bring back a new model to Ingersoll, and we're on it. Thank you.
In Ottawa, the Carney government has begun crafting what is now called the Team Canada Industrial Plan, a national strategy to protect manufacturing capacity and rebuild industrial confidence. The plan brings together federal and provincial leaders, labor unions, and private investors under a single mission: to keep Canada's productive core intact. Its first goal is to secure new production for the Ingersoll plant, keeping high-skilled jobs in Ontario. At the same time, Ottawa is pushing forward with battery manufacturing projects, critical minerals development, and industrial partnerships with the EU, Japan, and South Korea, countries that have recently inked trade deals with Washington. Canada wants to make sure those same markets stay open to Canadian exports, even as Trump reshapes the continent's trade map. At home, the plan represents a return to industrial activism, the belief that manufacturing is a pillar of national security. Prime Minister Mark Carney has described it as re-anchoring Canada's productive capacity. Ontario and Quebec premiers have pledged to join the effort. Doug Ford promised provincial incentives to keep auto assembly on Canadian soil, while Unifor has begun retraining programs for displaced workers in the EV sector. Economists from the Conference Board of Canada estimate that with coordinated policy support, Canada could recover half its lost auto jobs within 3 years. But beyond the numbers, a new tone is emerging. In Parliament, Joly ended her speech with a pledge that resonated across the country. Canada will not stand by while foreign decisions erase its industrial future. In Brampton and Ingersoll, that message is becoming a rallying cry. Workers are organizing, communities are raising funds, and a grassroots slogan has taken hold: "Keep it Canadian." The contrast with Washington could not be sharper. Trump celebrates his short-term victories, but his policies have sparked a wave of unity north of the border. Canada is not retreating, it is reorganizing. Trump may build walls, but Canada is building something stronger: resilience. This fight is no longer about cars alone, it is about who defines North America's industrial future: a United States acting alone, or a Canada determined to stand on its own feet. And for the families in Ingersoll and Brampton watching their assembly lines go dark, that determination means everything. Because in the battle for jobs and dignity, Canada's industrial heart is still very much alive.
The tariff and trade war with the U.S. is taking a tough turn for Canada's auto sector. Stellantis, the owner of Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and 11 other brands of vehicles, is investing $13 billion over the next 4 years to expand its manufacturing capacity in the U.S.
I'm not going to give them a penny because it was tied in to making sure Windsor and keep Brampton going. And we haven't given them a penny for Brampton yet. We gave them about $55 million out of the couple billion that the feds and I and the companies agreed. You know, it's disappointing.
In Ontario's political world, moments of raw emotion are rare. But when Premier Doug Ford declared that he would, quote, wouldn't give Stellantis a penny, it wasn't soundbite, it was a rupture. After months of quiet negotiations, the Premier's patience snapped when Stellantis confirmed that production of the Jeep Compass would leave Brampton, Ontario for Illinois. For the White House, it was a victory to celebrate. A global automaker coming home to create 5,000 American jobs. For Canada, it was a shock that cut deep. 3,000 positions gone overnight, billions in prior subsidies suddenly meaningless, and a painful reminder of how fragile cross-border manufacturing has become. Ford's words captured more than frustration. They reflected a growing realization. Washington's tariff war, once marketed as industrial revival, is starting to shake the very foundations of North American industry. To understand why Stellantis walked away, look at the ground beneath it. In early 2025, the Trump administration imposed new import duties on steel, aluminum, heavy trucks, and auto components ranging from 10 to 35%, citing national security. According to data from the U.S. Commerce Department, these tariffs pushed average input costs in the auto sector up by more than 12% by mid-year. For Canadian assembly plants, that change was crushing. Ontario's auto corridor depends on thousands of cross-border parts shipments every day. Each new duty turned that corridor into a maze of paperwork and extra costs. Then came the words that changed the tone. At a Canada-U.S. Relations Summit, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick declared that America should adopt an America First, Canada Second policy for the auto industry, a public confirmation that the White House intends to shift vehicle assembly south of the border. Canadian officials called it a massive threat to Ontario's manufacturing base, a signal that the era of shared production was ending. For companies like Stellantis, the message couldn't have been louder: move to America or pay the price. Stellantis saw the storm coming and moved before it hit.
We will not send a grain of critical minerals down there as long as we're under constant attack by President Trump.
Doug Ford's fury was immediate. He spoke of protecting Brampton jobs, defending Ontario's workers, and investing billions into infrastructure, critical minerals, and nuclear energy to secure the province's future. His message was political, but also personal. Ontario will not be a bystander in America's industrial game. Prime Minister Mark Carney, meanwhile, took the opposite route. He rejected calls for retaliation, urging calm and dialogue. To him, now is the time to talk, not to hit back. Ottawa's calculation is clear: avoid escalation before the 2026 USMCA review and quietly prepare long-term leverage. That divide, Ford's populist defiance versus Carney's technocratic restraint, mirrors the larger debate within Canada: fight or wait. Yet beneath the difference in tone lies a shared conclusion. The trade environment built over decades is no longer reliable. The same tariffs that were meant to revive American manufacturing have begun to unravel continental trust. While Trump celebrated reshoring as a triumph, Canada's provinces began pivoting toward independence. Nova Scotia lifted its ban on uranium exploration. Ontario accelerated funding for lithium and rare earth projects. In silence, Canada is building the next supply chain, one that can survive without Washington's permission. So far, Ottawa has chosen diplomacy. But if the White House keeps pushing, Canada is not without leverage. The first card is targeted tariffs. Canada could raise import duties on U.S. steel, agricultural goods, or pharmaceuticals, sectors with powerful political constituencies in Midwestern states. It has used this approach before. In 2018, retaliatory duties worth $16.6 billion pressured Congress to ease earlier metal tariffs. The second is resource leverage. The United States relies on Canada for more than 60% of its imported uranium, a third of its aluminum, and almost all of its hydroelectric power from cross-border grids. Restricting or repricing those exports would send shockwaves through U.S. manufacturing and energy markets. The third card is legal and diplomatic escalation. Canada could challenge Washington under USMCA's dispute settlement mechanism or at the WTO, arguing that unilateral tariffs violate agreed trade terms. Even if those cases take years, the threat alone raises uncertainty for American investors. And finally, diversification. Carney's government is already expanding negotiations with Asia and Europe. A trade pivot toward the EU, ASEAN, or India would dilute U.S. influence and give Canada alternative buyers for its critical minerals and EV components. Each option carries risk, but together they form a clear message. Economic power in North America no longer flows in one direction. For Trump, what was meant as a weapon to restore dominance could soon erode it. If allies like Canada begin decoupling supply chains, American producers will face higher costs, fewer partners, and growing isolation in markets they once controlled. From Brampton's quiet assembly lines to the corridors of Washington, this story is about more than one factory. It is the collision of two strategies, protectionism versus partnership, and the heavy cost of choosing the former. Doug Ford's Defiant struck a chord because it expressed what many Canadians feel: frustration that loyalty to cross-border trade has been met with tariffs and uncertainty. Mark Carney's patience, on the other hand, reflects the reality that Canada must navigate a superpower storm with strategy, not emotion. Yet together they reveal the same truth. When one partner turns inward, the other must adapt outward. For decades, the auto industry symbolized integration between the US and Canada. Parts built in Windsor, engines in Michigan, vehicles assembled across the border. Now that symbol has fractured. The irony is unmistakable. Trump's tariff crusade, meant to restore control, has ignited a new wave of independence right next door. The factory may move south, but the lesson travels north. In a global economy, walls built to protect can end up trapping those who build them. As the lights dim at Brampton's Jeep plant, Ford's words still echo, not as anger, but as a warning. If America keeps closing doors, Canada will learn to build its own.